Good morning and welcome to the webinar. Today's topic is communicating and connecting with individuals who have dementia. Thank you for joining us today. These complimentary webinars are brought to you through a collaboration of sponsorship with O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, and our newest sponsor, Caring Companions at Home, as well as Alzheimer's Orange County. My name is Laura Bronson, and I'm the Continuing Education Coordinator here at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I'm going to be your host today. Our sponsors are providing these webinars to you as a service to the community on topics that are beneficial for anyone who cares for and works with older adults, and that's whether you're professional or not. So we hope you find today's presentation informative and useful. Today, our presenter is going to be Kim Bailey. I would now like to introduce our speaker today, Kim Bailey. Kim Bailey has worked in the field of gerontology as a lecturer and professional for 30 years. She holds a master's degree in gerontology and a bachelor's degree in sociology, both from Cal State Fullerton. She's the program and education specialist with Alzheimer's Orange County, where she develops and presents programs and education for families and professionals. Kim also works in the social engagement and early stage programs for people with memory loss and their partners, and she coordinates the education and support program for those who live with intellectual disabilities and Alzheimer's disease. And here's a little more about Kim. Previously, Kim was an adjunct faculty professor where she taught at Cal State Fullerton and Vanguard University. She has served as a corporate gerontologist for the Hartford Insurance Group. She was the director of community relations and development for UC Irvine's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And she has served 12 years as the director of education in the formative years of the Alzheimer's Association of Orange County. So this is a very useful and important topic for so many of us who work with anyone who has dementia, and Kim is truly an expert on this topic. So it's a great opportunity to learn from her and to ask those questions you need answered. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim.
Okay, thank you so much for that great introduction, Laura. And I understand from Michelle, our technician, that some of you are having difficulty printing out the handouts. So we're working on that behind the scenes and troubleshooting that. And if nothing else, we can email those handouts to all of you at the conclusion of the webinar. So if you're having trouble with that, we do apologize. So let's get into our topic for today. And, really our goal here is to just learn some practical tools and techniques in the art of communicating with folks with memory loss. And, the wonderful thing about these tools is that if you use them, I promise you, it will reduce and maybe even stop some of the challenging behaviors that we typically see in this illness. And so that's a promise that I make to you, that these techniques really work. And in a typical in-person setting, I would be having you practice some of these new skills. But while we can't do that on a webinar, I'll certainly go, add some examples and talk about, sort of how to put this all into practice. So, and I want to add that this is one of our more popular courses, and so it's possible that some of you online today have been through this class, but I think it's always great to refresh your skills, and so whether you're new or whether you've seen this before, I think we can all benefit from it. So we're certainly very glad to have you with us today. So we need to do the obligatory overview of dementia before we get started with communication, just because we may have new people online with us. And I really feel strongly that you need like a solid foundation of knowledge about the disease itself before you can put some of these practices into place. So just as a reminder for those of you that have been working in the field a lot and for a long time, we think of dementia, that term dementia, as a general term that really describes a whole variety of different types of brain impairment All of them are progressive and terminal. They all affect memory and thinking, but there's so many different types, over 70 in fact. But of those 70, the most common type of dementia by far is Alzheimer's disease. And we think that it, really makes up probably up to 80% of the cases of dementia that we see. So I've just listed some of the other more common types of dementia. So there's, of course, we've just said Alzheimer's disease is number one, but if you're working in the field, then you also probably are seeing folks with vascular dementia, that dementia that's the result of a series of perhaps mini strokes that have occurred. You may see Lewy body disease, and of course, Lewy body really looks like a close cousin to Parkinson's disease, because people with Lewy body have those outward symptoms of Parkinson's, like the tremors and rigidity and difficulty with walking, etc. But Lewy body is also characterized by a dementia that it has as a major component hallucinations, reoccurring, consistent hallucinations. And it also features sort of a up and down pattern, fluctuations in lucidity of people that are living with it. They're also typically going through issues, sleep disorders, where they may thrash around, sort of wildly, and it can even be a bit dangerous for their caregivers, because sometimes they just, kind of push them out of bed. And so it is a distinct illness. It is different than Alzheimer's, as are all of the things you see on the screen. But again, it fits that general definition of dementia. Frontotemporal disease is another type of dementia that we see a lot. It used to be called Pick's disease, and it's characterized by a younger onset. Folks in their maybe 30s or 40s or 50 coming down with these symptoms. And because the damage to the brain occurs in the frontal temporal lobes, it doesn't present so much with the short-term memory like Alzheimer's does, the short-term memory loss, but rather big changes in personality and behavior and communication. And then we see alcohol-related dementia. I think we're seeing more and more of that with the boomers. No offense to the boomers, I'm a boomer myself. And then, there's just a host of other types of dementia, as I mentioned, but we're going to kind of focus on Alzheimer's today because it is number one. So this is what it does to folks by the end of the disease. So on the left side, you see a slide section of a normal aging brain, and of course it's so radically different. You can note the healthy intact brain tissue that's very densely packed and very few gaps there. And then when you move your attention to the slide on the right, it's a similar view, but this patient had end-stage Alzheimer's, and you see just huge fluid-filled gaps. And those are sections where healthy cells and healthy tissues once thrived. But now you can see that the brain is atrophied and less weight than a normal brain. And this is what the toll of Alzheimer's looks like on people's brains. And, I'm always a little hesitant to include these slides because they can be stressful for our family members who are online, but I think we all need sort of this wake-up call that even though people with Alzheimer's disease may look the same, they're not, and they have changing abilities as a result of the damage that starts in the brain very slowly and then, moves throughout the brain slowly over time, producing more and more deficits and until ultimately the end stage. And so the only thing that I think makes this really helpful, the slides, are that it's a little bit of a epiphany when people look at these and they I don't know, the first time I saw him, I went, wow, it's just amazing all the things that people with Alzheimer's can still do in the face of this type of damage. And so for that reason, we often will focus on their talents and their skills rather than their losses. And we'll certainly do that today as we talk about how to communicate. So in other words, you know, in looking at those slides of the brain, we know that it's not just about memory, although the general public often thinks that's the case, but also there's damage throughout the brain that makes language and communication difficult, executive functions, and really, you know, that's just a fancy term for the ability to do day-to-day tasks, things that people always were able to do before become more complex in nature to them, and they'll have difficulties. They also have difficulties with their visual spatial perception, and in fact, just in general, the way they perceive the world. And so vision and all of their senses change over time. And I always ask myself, you know, gosh, if I had all of that going on, the memory, the language, the task, the visual spatial, I'm sure that really, it can't help but manifest itself in some changes in mood and behavior. So I think really the bottom line, particularly with this topic, is that Alzheimer's is a disease of emotion. And you can see this simple graphic on your screen here. It's sort of, you know, if you start over on the left-hand side, and actually that's where we should start because that is where they live. They really do live in a state of confusion. And obviously some days are better than others, but that low level of confusion increases over time, and it is always present. And so you have to ask yourself, you know, if I lived in a state of confusion as a human being, no doubt that would cause me to feel uncomfortable. And most of us, when we're uncomfortable, if it gets to a higher degree of discomfort, you know, we will act out. And so in myself, I call that a meltdown. And I'm sure everyone online has had one at one time or another. And if you haven't, I want to talk to you and find out what your secret is. And it's no different for people with Alzheimer's, except in the fact that this is a cycle that can play itself out continually. So throughout the day. And what we're going to talk about today, my hope and my prayer is that, you know, the tools that you learn today will help to kind of mitigate this cycle and stop it from playing itself out continually day after day or even hour after hour. And so does that work 100% of the time? Probably not. But when you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's, even if you can stop that cycle half the time, it's going to make life much more comfortable and easier for the people you're caring for or the person you're caring for. And then as another great result is that it's going to make life easier for you as well, particularly if you're, for example, working in an RCFE setting and you're caring for multiple folks with Alzheimer's. You know, you can imagine, you know, with this cycle repeating itself and all your clients, how difficult that makes life for everyone. And so hopefully we can do something about that. So yeah, that's the promise I'm making, that if you adopt this style of communication, and very importantly, if you remain flexible, it will lead to you know, the reduction and maybe even prevention of some of those characteristics, those behaviors and symptoms that we often see in this disease. So we're going to look at the lady in the picture there, and we're going to try to turn her frown into a smile, right? That's our goal. Okay, so some important guidelines just in general going in. You know, we have to understand what isn't possible to change. And I know in our work with our families, that this is really an important message to impart. Because it's really, really hard when you've been in a relationship with someone for many years and you know each other so well, and it's just hard to understand that as the disease progresses, they're simply not able to do the things that they used to do. And, you know, I guess as family members, we're always trying to pull them back, you know, and reel them in and make them the way they used to be, and that is just unfortunately impossible in this progression. So if we lower our expectations, we can lower our frustrations. So it's like letting the bar down a little bit and not keeping it quite so hard, and it just ends up making life easier if you operate this way. And we need to remember that our thoughts and our beliefs and actions, particularly our actions, are going to significantly impact their behavior. And I have seen this play itself out over the years, time and time again, even with later stage people with dementia who don't even talk much. They can still like read our body language and our tone, our attitude, and they will be reactive to that. So whenever we're doing staff training, we always have to say, you know, everybody comes to this job with their own background and their own problems and their own baggage, and you just have to be really careful to leave that baggage at the door before you walk in and start caring for residents or clients with dementia, because they will read your, as I said, they'll read your tone and your body language and all that. And if you're having a bad day, then chances are they're also, it's going to like a domino effect. So we want to make sure to control that. And when you do see behaviors, remember that behind all behaviors, there is a trigger of sorts, and each behavior has meaning. And really, behavior is nothing more than, you know, an unmet need that this person is trying to communicate to you. So behavior doesn't usually happen randomly, and people certainly don't get up in the morning and say, you know, I'm going to make her life hell today. They're just not capable by virtue of their diagnosis. And we do a lot of forgiving in this disease. In fact, we forgive people 100% of the time, just because if they were able to control their behavior, they wouldn't have this diagnosis. And then ultimately, we're out to make a connection. And this point is really difficult when you're caring for multiple people and you have all that responsibility. Because what I want to say is that, you know, you may have a task in mind, like a shower, for example. And, you know, the resident just is not wanting to do that. Ultimately, if you push them, it's just going to get worse. And the end result will be something that is way out of control. And so I want you to just attach more meaning to making a connection with the person. It overrides the task. So I had the privilege of being a personal caregiver for a lady that was in her 90s, and I was her caregiver for 6 years. And I learned this lesson the hard way. You know, I wake up every morning with a whole list, a whole agenda of things that we had to do. And, you know, her agenda was not my agenda. And so sometimes, if I'll use the example of the shower again, she just didn't want to do it. And so we'd end up instead on the couch, just kind of holding hands and looking at old pictures of her husband, you know, and sharing that special moment, which really is much more important than a shower. No one ever died from not having a shower every day. And so it's easier to do when you're a family caregiver or caring one-on-one for a person. Again, I'm going to keep stressing the difficulty of managing multiple people, but still keep that connection in mind. And when you adopt these do's and don'ts that we're going to talk about today, there's going to be untold benefits. And I want to give you an example of how this works. one of the things that we see, of course, with people living with dementia is that they don't always tell the truth, right? So this can be an ethical dilemma for us. We always want to correct them or interject, but if you are a compassionate communicator, you won't do that. And the example that I always like to use is one of my clients here approached me one day, and he asked me where I went to school. And I said, Cal State Fullerton. And he answered, oh, in this, kind of sneering voice. And I said, well, where did you go to school? And he said, Harvard. And I went, oh, wow, Harvard. Tell me about Harvard. And, for the next 15 minutes, he was so in his glory, telling me all about his experiences on campus, and you could see that this put him in a really great mood, and he was just kind of strutting with self-confidence. And right in the middle of our conversation, his wife walked up behind me and whispered in my ear, he never went to college. So, yeah, so he never went to college, but does that matter? Absolutely not, because in those 15 minutes, he had high self-esteem. He was very happy-go-lucky, not frustrated. He felt like this big man on campus, and we had a real great sharing moment. So it would have been easy for me and sort of natural for me to correct him, but if I had, all these benefits would have gone away. And so I hope that example helped you to see why we have to actually engage in not lying so much. I prefer to call it therapeutic fibbing. And that's one of the tools that we need. And really, it's all about making that person feel comfortable in their reality. We're not going to try to bring them back to ours. They're simply not able. All right. So what are the steps to compassionate communication? I think there's 5 of them. We'll go through them quickly. First, we have to be a good listener. And it sounds like a no-brainer, but actually in our society, it's kind of, we're not that good of listeners anymore. Everybody's so hurried and multitasking, and so we've sort of lost the art of conversation. So we have to get it back when we're working with our people that are living with dementia. We can do that by, even if we're not really following what they're saying, we're going to make that eye contact with them, express interest in what they're saying. I'm usually nodding my head while they're talking, or maybe sometimes I'll say, oh, that's fabulous. But what we don't want to do is interrupt, because, they have a very short and limited attention span. So if we interrupt, then that gets them off track. And that's when you can see a behavior when they become frustrated. So we're not going to interrupt. We're going to listen, express interest. We're going to focus not so much on the words that they're saying, but how they're feeling as they're speaking. If you look at the image there on the screen, you can see that this person is very engaged in the conversation. And so that is lovely. And so, yeah, and above all, we need to be patient. We may be hearing the same story over and over and over again, and no doubt we will, because this is a hallmark of the disease, this repetition. But we always listen like we've never heard it before. Step 2 is facilitate a connection. And we're going to do that by using what I call the compassionate approach. And when you use the compassionate approach, it means that you approach people from the front, not from behind. You make eye contact with them. You might lower yourself to their level. Avoid getting too close if you don't want to invade their personal space. But you can use a little touch and gestures, depending on, how appropriate that is with each individual. And you use a calm voice, and you speak simply and slowly. And I want to really reinforce this, because when I'm teaching in person, I sort of model for everyone the right and the wrong way to approach people. But since we can't do this there, I just want to warn you about coming up from behind, because their sensory information has changed. Their vision has started to slant downward. They do lose some peripheral vision. So even approaching from the side can be problematic. You want to really let them see you coming. You want to have that good open body language, big smile on your face. And as I said, speak calmly, simply, and slowly. If you're able to do that before you even open your mouth, you're in good shape, because you've already started to, kind of establish a trust with that person. And that person may not know you or recognize you. And so, it's really incumbent on us to set ourselves up for success with our communication. In as much as you can, be aware of the environment. I know for those of you working for agencies, there's not much you can do to change the environment, but you should be aware that if there's too much stimulation, too much activity or noise or too many people running around, that can hamper good communication. Excessive noise, especially loud or unidentifiable noises, can be frightening. If the environment is either too bright, producing a glare or reflections, or too dark, that can be a problem. People start to see things, in a darker space, shadows, and might think that, it might spark hallucinations. So, mirrors or other reflecting surfaces can be a problem. I know I've heard of some individuals with Alzheimer's that wouldn't recognize themselves in the mirror or think that their reflection was someone else. So, all of these things can be distorting to a person who has brain damage, around the area of perception. So, and then of course, when we're working in a care community, maybe staff coming and going, visitors coming and going, or maybe even changes in routine can really hamper our ability to make a good connection and communicate well with our residents. So just be aware of that. And, maybe just opening and closing blinds can help. Who knows? And then step 4 in steps to being a good communicator is to kind of adjust your approach. And we really just talked about this in a way. But remember to kind of break things down, ask one question at a time, give simple step-by-step directions, avoid open-ended questions. And what do I mean by open-ended questions? Like, what do you want for lunch today is an open-ended question that can actually send someone spiraling, because there's just so many possibilities and they can't think of them. So a better way to frame that would be to offer choice, which is always great, but you might just, instead of saying, what do you want for lunch, you can say, would you like a ham sandwich today or a tuna sandwich? So, by the way, I'll give you a little tip right here about last word connection. It's interesting, but, we have this thing about wanting to offer choices to people, which I think is good, because we certainly don't want to remove all choice from the person's life. But what we've learned over the years is that if you offer a couple of things, they tend to remember the last thing you said and kind of seize on that. So if you offer a ham sandwich and a turkey sandwich, they're probably going to say turkey sandwich. So you may not even have ham on hand, but if you want to offer choice, kind of rest assured that the last option is the one that they'll generally pick. So that's just another tool. And then step 5 is, and I alluded to this earlier, focus on remaining skills. I mean, gosh, we looked at those slides and we saw the brain, how much damage occurs, but that damage happens very slowly over a period of generally years. And so there's so much that people living with these diseases can still do, and that's where we want to keep our focus. But we have to remember to match activities to abilities. And so that means something they can do in their early stage is going to have to be modified so they can do it when they're more moderately impaired. We want to give praise and offer compliments all the time. They may forget our praise, so let's do it a lot. We want to encourage people to be independent. And again, if you're caring for one person, it's easier than when you're caring for multiple people. But, rather than kind of try to resist the urge to just do everything for them, because when they do lose skills, they usually remain lost for good. So, rather than, for example, getting someone dressed, try just offering, some prompts and cues and letting them do that themselves. They will have better self-esteem and feel more independent if you're able to do that. But of course, as the disease progresses, you'll need to step in more and more. Respond to feelings, not words. Establish routines. They tend to do better with some structure and routine to their lives. But I'm going to add here that that doesn't mean you should erase all spontaneity from their lives. So, by all means, from time to time, when I was caring for my lady, maybe things weren't going that great. And I just say, you know what, let's get out of here. Let's go for a drive. And we would, and that would make everything better. So we don't want to rule out spontaneity. And we want to keep emphasizing long-held skills. And this is a direct reference to their long-term memory, which is the last thing to go. And so the things that they remember most are the things they've been doing the longest. So they'll remember work and, long-term relationships and activities for a very long time. And we want to, of course, leverage that to have them doing the things that they love. Okay, I'm just taking a look at my time here, and it looks like I'm doing okay. I am going to just talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts, and I want to refer to one of the handouts that we posted today that is a front and back handout on all of these things, all the do's and don'ts. It's slanted towards family members caring for a loved one at home, but it has a wonderful application to professionals as well, and it gives examples of all these things, and I'm going to give some examples as well. So the do's are to repeat. They repeat a lot. It's not their fault. It's just part of the disease. And so if they are stating things in a repetitious way or asking the same question over and over again, we're going to treat that like something we've never heard before, and we're going to respond. And I'm going to stop right here and talk about how hard that is. It's really hard, even for the pros. So I'm talking to the family members now, especially. When I was caring, this was, my life for 6 years. The lady that I cared for, who I loved dearly, would repeat the same things all day, every day. And there was a pattern to it. In the morning and daytime, she'd ask what day it was, what time it was, what month it was, over and over again. And then as it got into the after lunch period, she had a single question that she asked over and over again, and it was, do we have stuff for dinner tonight? And that would go on for several hours. And then into the night, she would, as I got her to bed, she would ask probably, I want to say 30 times, did we lock the front door? And so this repetition was just our way of life for 6 years, and it was hard. I don't mind admitting it was hard, especially at night because I was tired too. And but you have to think about the meaning behind the behaviors. Remember, I said that earlier. And so I always figured that during the day she was just confused and struggling to orient herself. And I'm not sure what the thing about dinner was, but I do know that as she asked over and over again, did we lock the front door? That was all about feeling safe and secure. And so, our job is to respond to the feelings, not the statement. And so I would give her a lot of reassurance and comfort and tell her over and over again that she was safe and sound. And that seemed to work. The second do is accept the blame. And, there's lots of behaviors where, I'll give an example. Someone with dementia might lose something. And when they do, they sort of are typically wanting to blame that on the caregiver. So, they may say, you took my wallet. And instead of saying, how ridiculous, of course I didn't take your wallet. Again, think of the feelings behind that. This person has lost a valuable thing and they're very disoriented and very upset and not at all grounded. And so the best thing to do there is to just say, oh, I'm so sorry, you've lost your wallet. Let me help you look for it. Let's look for it. That must be scary. Do step back or leave the room if things have gone out of control. If the person is so frustrated they're yelling at you, or if you feel like you can't handle things, it's okay to step away for a few minutes. You just can't get in your car and leave, but step back. And you're only human, and it is hard to keep your patience all the time. So, step back and do some deep breathing or whatever you need to do to compose yourself. And that's human and it's okay. Do agree with them. They're going to say, as I mentioned before, a lot of things that just aren't true. But instead of trying to reason with them, it's best to go with the flow. We have to really be flexible, as I mentioned earlier. We want to agree with them. And then we want to learn to use the fine art of distraction. And this is a very key skill to have. When people start down a negative path or saying things that are concerning, you agree with them, and then you just change the subject. And, maybe say something like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's talk about it while we eat lunch. And then, that last word connection that I mentioned might kick in and they hear lunch. And if they're like me, always hungry, there's a good chance that they'll get out of that path that they were on. So what we don't want to do is try to reason with them. And it's just our nature to be this way. If you think about when you're out with friends and someone states something that you don't agree with, you want to try to reason with them or correct them, it's just kind of natural, but we can't do that anymore. We can't reason, we can't confront people, we can't remind them that they're forgetting. And that's what we do every time we tell them that something isn't true. It just reminds them that they're incapacitated. We don't question recent memory. I know a lot of the families that we've worked with think it's helpful to sort of not grill the person, but just ask questions just to jog their memory. They feel like, if they do that, that can enhance their cognition, but it's often just a very uncomfortable place for them. And then above all, we do not want to take it personally. And that's hard, isn't it? Very difficult. A few more do's and just a few more things that I want to reinforce, and then I'm going to give you some examples, and we'll move on to our question and answer period. So avoid insistence. If try again later. Whatever it is, it makes sense to try again later. A favorite expression of mine is, if you don't insist, they can't resist. Agree with them or distract them to a different subject, or even better, a different activity. And that is where, you know, the fact that they do have a short concentration span, that's where that works in our favor. So again, distracting and redirecting people is really key in our work. Accept the blame, as we've said, when something's wrong, even when it's not our fault, and leave the room if necessary in order to avoid confrontations. So I will share with you one personal example of a time that I had to leave the room. Just because I want you to know, it's so human. I was always very good at just accepting anything that my lady said or did, but there was one thing that just I couldn't handle it, and that was her racism. And keep in mind that she was in her 90s. So, of course, she grew up during a time when it was terribly racist. And she sort of reverted back to that. And so she would say things that were very upsetting to me. And I always just had to bite my tongue. And so I would just step away for a minute. I had to. So when you do this, it's not, you know, admitting defeat. It's just trying to avoid a confrontation. And everybody thinks that they're not going to be in a confrontation, but, you know, we're all human. And so I hope that was helpful. Give short one-sentence explanations. Be patient, cheerful, reassuring. Just keep going with the flow. Practice 100% forgiveness. As I said before, if they could control their behavior, they really wouldn't even have this diagnosis. And they can't remember your praises, your compliments, and your reassurances. So keep repeating them. And I notice I'm repeating some things too, but I really am just trying to reinforce some of these points because I know that it'll make life easier for both you and the person or persons that you're caring for. Keep in mind that last word connection and use nonverbal communication. And by that, I mean that can be anything from hugs to smiles to touch, art, music. There are all kinds of ways to communicate other than speaking. And in fact, we've learned that, in fact, research has shown that the majority of our impact in successful communication is really more due to our body language and our gestures and nonverbal behaviors than the actual words that we speak. So it just brings home all of these points. And then do not lose your sense of humor. They haven't lost theirs. And I find that humor is really a therapeutic tool that we all need to use. And so I try to practice that. Address the person by name, that whatever name he or she prefers. Try to avoid sudden movements. Give those one-step directions. Use short, familiar phrases. Keep using that nonverbal communication that we've been talking about. And, you know, sort of think of this as your formula for success. In all communication, we are A, going to validate by responding to the feelings, B, reassure, and then C, very skillfully distract or redirect. Okay, I just want to give a few examples. I'm going to do this somewhat quickly because I do want to have time to do some of those questions and answers before people log off. So don't reason. The person with dementia says, shower, I just took a shower. What you could say is, you haven't showered for several days. And if you don't shower often enough, you may get an infection. But what we want to really say is, today's our regular bath day. I'm sorry if I forgot to tell you. Let's go get cleaned up and then I'll make you a nice snack. How about don't argue? I'm leaving now, says the person with dementia. It's time for me to pick up the kids from school. Well, you could say, what? Your kids are grown. They're not in school anymore. But of course, we're not going to say that. We're going to say, it sounds like you're missing your kids right now. You don't have to pick them up till later. Let's play cards before you go. Okay, what about don't confront? The person with dementia says, nobody's going to make decisions for me. I'm leaving and I won't be back. Well, what you might be thinking is, you're not going anywhere and you can't leave. You're in a secured memory care unit. But of course, we're not going to say that. We're going to say, oh, I'm sorry. This is really a tough one. You know what? I care about you. We're going to get through this. Why don't you help me for a moment with something? So when you ask someone with dementia to help you, that's music to their ears. So you can think of some tasks that you might give someone, and that's a great way to redirect them. Don't remind them that they forgot. We see this all the time. So the person with dementia is telling you, you know, my daughter hasn't visited me for a very long time. Do not say, oh, actually, she was just here yesterday and you had a great visit. Don't say that. Oh, here's something you could say. You really love your daughter, don't you? Why don't we call her when we get back from our walk? Don't question recent memory. The person with dementia who you've been caring for 10 years says, hi, what's your name? What you're thinking is, you know my name, I work with you every day. But of course you don't say that. Instead, just a short explanation like, hi, it's Kim. I'm excited about being with you today. Don't take it personally. Get out. I don't need your help. So if you take it personally, you might want to say something like, oh, wow, I work so hard to take good care of you every day, and this is the thanks that I get? Fine. You might think that, but you can't say it. You might just say, no problem, that's fine. I'm so sorry I upset you. I'll give you a little privacy, and then step back. Maybe go find a coworker, because sometimes they just need a change of face. Or for you family members, it could be another family member. Or just step back and then come back and try again later. This one is kind of nuanced, but when you say the word but all the time, it's like a big stop sign in their face. So try substituting the word but with nevertheless. The person with dementia says, I am not eating this. I hate chicken. And you might say, I know chicken's not your favorite, but it's what we're having for lunch. Instead, you could smile and say, I know chicken's not your favorite food. Nevertheless, I'd really appreciate it if you just take a couple bites. So keeping all this in mind, as we sort of wrap things up, I want you to think about your communications with your current situation, whether it's your family members or it's residents or clients. And just remember, in all your interactions, try your best to remain calm, to really pay attention to the feelings that you're seeing expressed, to give that person lots of reassurance. And then if necessary, it's okay, as I've stated twice now, to remove yourself and come back in a little bit. Just don't leave people alone. You can bring in someone else, but step back. Okay, so thank you so much for being with all of us today. I think that I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Laura, at this point.
Thank you so much, Kim. What a valuable topic and very useful information. So now, if you do have any questions for Kim, please be sure to type them into the chat box in the control panel. We do have questions that we'll be directing to Kim, so please do stay with us. But before we start that Q&A session, If we do run past 12:30 p.m., you're welcome to remain online to ask your question or listen to the answers, but if you do need to leave the webinar, you can. Just remember that if you do want to earn CE credit, you will need to be online for the full 60 minutes. And also, I wanted to take this time to thank our sponsors one more time for making this presentation possible. We're so grateful for the support from O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, and our newest sponsor, Caring Companions at Home. And there's one more thing before we get to those questions. Our next month webinar will be on March 12th, and this is going to be on the topic of supporting LGBT older adults. And this webinar is presented by SAGE, which is Services and Advocacy for LGBT Elders. And this is a highly renowned national organization which usually charges a fee for their training, but they have graciously offered to provide this presentation for us at no charge. However, we cannot record the webinar, and we will not be posting it on our website for future viewing, which is what we normally do, because this is their proprietary training. So be sure to attend next month's webinar. It'll be your only opportunity to hear this presentation. Okay, so now let's get to our questions. We do have one question I will start with for Kim. And that is, it's an interesting question. In your opinion, do you think that children who experienced PTSD with loss of executive functions are perhaps more susceptible to dementia later in life, given that those areas of the brain were affected earlier on?
There are a lot of risk factors for dementia, and we don't have time to go into all of them, but I will say that PTSD can be a risk factor for dementia. It won't be for everyone, but certainly trauma, either physical or emotional in nature, is known to be a risk factor. And whoever asked that question, if you want to reach out to me via email, I can probably send you some information on that. Okay, so my answer is yes, it can be, but it's not definitive.
Okay, thanks. And we do have another question. Someone has asked, how do you deal with moving from a regular bed to a bed with railings?
Okay, and I hope people aren't getting dizzy watching me, but one of our guests has asked that I show a couple of screens again, so I'm going to do that while I answer the question about transferring. So, you know, I'm assuming you're talking about a hospital bed. They have rails on them, and you are easily able to lower the rails to make it easier to transfer people. And I'll mention too that if you don't have a hospital bed, the client that I took care of, I got a little handrail that I added to the side of her regular bed that made it easier for her to transfer, because she could hold on to that handle as she pulled herself to a seated position on the side of the bed, and then with my help to a standing position, and then later into a wheelchair. So I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for, but the rails should not get in the way of transferring people, is my answer. Okay?
Okay. And here's another question. I take care of a 90-year-old person with memory impairment. At nighttime, when he goes to the bathroom, he's very confused. He does not know how to start urinating, and he does not know when or what to do when he finishes. When I try to give him one-sentence instruction, he can repeat the instruction, but not able to follow. And he'll start saying things like, I have to register something. Am I get to vote? I tried many ways to redirect, but unable to, because he has this dementia and he's half asleep. So what can he do?
Right. Okay. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer this well, but I'll say a couple of things. One is that nighttime is when people are generally the most disoriented. It's when all people are disoriented, myself included. I get up in the middle of the night and kind of stumble to the bathroom and I'm half asleep. And so you've got that going on. But you can also prompt him, and cue him. I mean, it's like any other activity of daily living. Sometimes they need an assist with that. And so, if you know what I mean. So you can use verbal commands and I don't know, I feel like I should go offline with this conversation. But
Yeah.
you literally have to help people. I mean, as people become more impaired, with all of their activities of daily living, you have to offer more, you have to step in and offer more and more assist. And so, unless he's having a physical problem with urinary retention, I think he's just forgetting how everything works. And so you have to use gestures and prompts to get him to do that.
And Kim, this next question kind of overlaps with this previous question. Somebody asks, what can you do when a loved one doesn't understand how to push their number two out when using the restroom? This person is holding their breath, but nothing's happening.
Okay. Well, I mean, they may be constipated. So I would, or maybe they just need a stool softener. But, sometimes it's just going to take a lot of time. But I would kind of treat it as constipation and see if that helps. And if you use those stool softeners, then that should help with that as well. Boy, I'm getting all the fun questions, huh?
Yeah,
But
there's a lot.
I went through both of these questions, with the person I cared for. And so, all I can say is that caregiving becomes more and more intimate as time goes on. And we're called upon to, help people and at the same time to help them retain their dignity. And we just do the best that we can. When I was helping my client with these intimate things, in my mind, I thought, it's like she's my mother. And of course, I would help my mother in any way I could. So, but yeah. So hopefully that's helpful.
And somebody else asks a brief question. If your patient does not talk much, do you encourage conversation or just let it go?
Yeah, you just go with the flow. For many of us, we are uncomfortable with silence, but I think maybe putting a little music on or, just sitting with that person. You don't have to speak to have good communication, I think is my message. And so, a lot of times, as I said, the discomfort is on our part, not theirs. And if they're nonverbal, so be it. But we can still, talk to them and give them a lot of praise and tell them how pretty they look and smile or handsome. We can play a little music. We can just be together, maybe take a drive. There's just lots of ways to be close to a person, without speech.
Right. And somebody did provide a suggestion for the issue with the urination, and that is to just try running some water. The old, tried trick.
That's so obvious. I forgot all about it. But yeah.
And somebody else has asked, can you advise some more techniques for getting the client to bathe? That's always a hard one.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I never said shower or bath. I used to always call it a spa day. Let's have a spa day today. And I would use that trick with the last word connection. So I'd say, let's have a spa day. Well, I'll shampoo your scalp and I'll get you all clean. And then afterwards, I'll give you a full body massage. And so for a long time, all she heard was full body massage and she'd be like heading for the bathroom. Later on, over the years, she forgot what a spa was. So I just would call it a day of beauty. And, but the bottom line that I want to tell you is that when they say no, no means no. And so there are lots of tips on how to help with bathing that are available through our helpline. In fact, we have a whole fact sheet on that if you want to reach out to our organization for that. And it's setting the mood, it's having soft music on, it's having the bathroom be a warm, inviting place, big fluffy towels, maybe a diffuser in there, you know, and then just really honoring their privacy and their dignity in removing their clothes and in helping them sort of step by step. By all means, use a shower bench. It makes it so much easier for them, a handheld shower so that they can control the spray. These are all, you know, sort of tips about bathing. And again, don't, you know, if they don't like bathing, don't make them do it every day. It's not necessary unless they're, you know, incontinent and really needing to bathe. And I also did sponge baths when I needed to. So, yeah, by all means, reach out to our, it's on our web. Does everybody have our web address? I will put it in the chat.
And I'll be mentioning at the end.
Okay.
And we actually have a clarification from the viewer who asked about the bed with the railings. And she was saying that her point is that this person with dementia does not want a bed with railings. So I think it's trying to transition them from using a bed without to using one with.
Oh, I get it. Okay, so I would start with that that handrail that I talked about. It's not like a bed rail. It's just a, oh gosh, you can get it at any medical supply place, and it just, you just tell the person, this is just to help pull you up. I mean, it does offer some safety, but it's kind of a transition to bed rail. So just look up portable handrail for bed and see what you think.
That's a good point. And I think this might be our last question here. We are running a little late, but if you want to stay for the question, they're always very good. How should you manage a person with dementia who has had a recent death of their spouse or another close family member? How is it explained? Do you simply meet them where they are and share it as simply as possible?
That is a tough question that everyone struggles with, and every person is different. But I have to tell you that, you know, I have been to funerals where the person with dementia isn't even sure why they're there, and they keep asking, why am I here? Who died? When it was their spouse. So it's very confusing to them, and it's a personal decision that you have to make. Sometimes there are families that just don't even go there. It's just so hard because they'll learn the information that the person died and they'll grieve, and then they'll forget they died, and then they'll grieve again, and that grief just cycles back and forth all the time. And so as a kindness, sometimes we choose not to tell them. Or if we do tell them, we try to keep it brief, and, you know, we have to steel ourselves for the fact that they may forget that information and keep asking. Now, on the other hand, when they're asking for someone who died a long time ago, I'll make a little distinction here. When they start asking for like their mother or their father, you know, that's where you redirect. You reassure and redirect, and you'll say, oh, you know what, I think they're out of town right now, but let's call them tomorrow, rather than saying, oh, gosh, your mom died years ago. So I hope that's helpful. It's very difficult. There's nothing easy about this illness, right?
Right, absolutely. Gosh, we are getting more questions, and I don't know if we have time.
We can keep going as long as we need to, and then people who need to drop off will. But just remember, as Laura said earlier, your evaluation won't pop up automatically if you leave now, because it only pops up after we end the webinar. Okay? So let's have the next question then.
Okay. Do you have some tips for how to get a dementia individual to answer questions when the person is not wanting to cooperate? Gosh, I can't. If the person just does not want to cooperate.
My advice is to drop it. It
Yeah.
really is. I mean, if you don't insist, they can't resist, and you can try again another time. But if you're probably asking questions that they're just incapable of answering, and that's making them frustrated and resistant. I mean, I'm not sure. I'd have to know more about the particular circumstances, but my rule of thumb is don't push it with them at all about anything. Just drop it and return to it later.
Okay.
Easier said than done, huh?
Yes, with everything here. Now somebody does have kind of a general question about diagnosis. What are some practical signs or examples that a person may have dementia and should be professionally assessed?
Yeah, well, with Alzheimer's, it's usually the presenting symptom is short-term memory loss. So they fool you because they can remember everything from way back, but they're having trouble with recent memory. That's sort of a telltale sign. And then there's other symptoms like getting lost or repeating themselves, etc. But my advice is always to have that person evaluated because there are many, many, many reasons for memory loss. Not all of it equals Alzheimer's. Sometimes there's a treatable condition that's causing them to have these symptoms. So you should definitely call our helpline and ask for all the information about diagnosis, and we can give you referrals to where you can get a good assessment done. I also want to take this opportunity to mention that we do free memory checks on the first Friday of each month. Now, these are not diagnoses. This is just a way to get a testing done and get a baseline of how you're doing. We have trained people who administer the testing, and at the end of the test, they'll either tell you that you fell within the expected range or you have fallen outside of the expected range. And if you fall outside of the expected range, the next step is to take the results to your doctor and get a full workup. So we're pleased to offer this as a free community service, and many of our colleagues are coming and getting tested because it's always a good idea to have a baseline. So we offer that as a service, and you can see that information on our website.
Okay, and I had a question here and it's moving away. Okay, here is this next question. How do you help redirect a resident who is urinating and defecating in odd areas, such as the corner of a room or in cup holders or in a chair, something like that?
Yeah, that is so normal. That's so normal, and it's because they are so confused. They don't know where the bathroom is. And so we want the bathroom door to be open, and hopefully there's they can see from even their room, the toilet. They need to see where the bathroom is. So you could put a signage with a picture of the toilet on the door or keep the door open. This is just part of the disease, and a dresser drawer or a trash can, is easily mistaken for a place where they can use, and it's part of the illness. So anything we can do to give them a visual of the toilet is good. And then the other thing is take them to the toilet, every hour or every hour and a half. You want to say, come on, let's go to the bathroom, and take them, and that's actually good because that can help, that routine will help to delay incontinence. So I know it's not the most pleasant thing, but like I said, anything they do is not their fault. It's really about their diagnosis. And so we want to make it easier for them, take them to the bathroom every hour, make sure they can see the toilet, and other suggestions probably could be given by our helpline. Thank you.
Oh gosh, and we still have a couple of more questions.
That's good.
Okay, so one
I'm not
is,
going anywhere.
oh, what a gal, Kim. Thanks so much for your time. You know, we
Yeah.
appreciate people hanging in there to ask the questions and hear the answers. It's very informative. So this person needs clarification. How many stages are there in Alzheimer's disease? I keep hearing
Yeah.
that a low stage is stage 6 or 5.
Oh
I'm not
my
sure.
goodness. We get this all the time. There are different scales available for measuring the stages, and I believe the National Alzheimer's Association talks about 7 stages. It's so confusing. For me, I just keep it simple. I talk about the early stage, the middle stage, and the late stage. And, while we're on the subject of stages, it's so darn hard to tell what stage a person is in, right?
Hmm.
Because, we all have good days and bad days. Plus, when you're with that person every day, it's hard to be objective. And so I kind of stray away from an arbitrary framework of stages, and I just sort of stick with early, middle, and late. And by the way, the middle stage is the stage that lasts the longest, typically. And that's where, they need more and more supervision and support, but they still retain a lot of skills and memories and talents. And so they're still usually physically healthy. So that's a stage where there's a lot that we can do with them to improve their quality of life. So my suggestion is stick to early, middle, and late, because all the other frameworks are confusing.
Good idea. Okay, this does look like our last question.
Okay.
As far as questioning a dementia patient, is it unkind to remind my loved one that I am their daughter, or to ask what my name is? I understand that it's
Yeah.
probably trying to validate my own feelings rather than theirs.
Yeah, it is. And God,
Yeah.
I've got some tears in my eyes right now because this is so painful. Um, the thing that I'll say is by the time the damage is that severe, it's just so hard for them to remember anything. And my feeling has always been that they do remember you. They may not remember your name or the relationship, but they know that you are someone important to them, and they know that you are someone that loves them and that they love. And so they do get confused, and this is heartbreaking. But again, you just blame it on the disease. That darn disease is to blame, not the person. The person is trying so hard. But my sense is that they do remember that you're someone that is close to them. I would advise against trying to correct them. It's reminding someone that they've forgotten something that important really doesn't feel that kind to me. And so I just say go with the flow. That's my answer, for everything. Even it is so painful, and I acknowledge that.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, these questions keep coming in, Kim.
That's fine. I'm here.
Okay. All
I'm
righty.
crying, but I'm here.
Yeah. We do have a question from somebody who says, I have a friend who takes care of an individual who has dementia and is diabetic, and this person requires an injection every day. But this person does not have anyone to give the injection but himself, and cannot hire a private RN or LVN just for the injection. As a caregiver, my friend wants to offer help. What option is available?
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
Well, here you're getting into a big area of liability. And a private caregiver like that should not be giving injections or providing medical care when they're not licensed or capable. And, really that client should be using home health care, or trying to find a resource, someone to come in and give those injections. I don't know. Someone needs to talk to the doctor about this. I mean, is there any way maybe that person could have medication instead of an injection? I really don't know, but this whole question makes me nervous just because of the liability. You know, really,
Right.
they need a qualified person watching her. Yeah.
All righty. I think that that's about it. One person did provide a suggestion about the bathing, that it might
Good.
help to sit the person with dementia on a bench over a hot bathtub where you, or a bathtub where you have nice warm
Ah.
water, like 10 inches of water is her
I
suggestion.
love that idea. You know, I've never heard that before, and I love that because I'm sure it's the shower that they're afraid of. You know,
Right.
I think they're terrified of the shower, and with all of their distortion and perceptual problems, I often wonder if they don't see the water coming out of the shower head as a threat. You know, like maybe it's like
Right.
glass or something. So I love that idea because then you can really, really, really give them a sponge bath and keep them warm. You can keep a towel around certain areas. I love that idea. Very nice.
Yeah. All right, and I think that's it for our questions. Oh no, another one just came in. It says my friend suggested home health, but they said that they will not come out. My friend, oh, this is a response
Oh, the
from the same
diabetic.
person. Okay, my friend
Yeah.
suggested home health, but they said they will not come out. My friend is not giving an injection, trying to give instruction, but getting harder
Uh-oh.
and harder for him to follow. Thanks for trying to
Yeah.
answer. Okay.
Yeah, that is just a really tough question. I'm not sure how to answer it at this point. You know, maybe they need to hire an RN to come in and do that, but somebody
Yeah.
qualified. She needs to talk to the family. She needs to talk to whoever hired her, and, you know, address this question and work with a physician and try to figure this out. But
Yeah,
it's
it's
a,
complicated.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know what? I want to tell everybody who's still on the line, because there are 60 of you still on the line, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today and being with us. And I really enjoy this topic. I hope it was helpful for all of you. And I just want to thank you for attending today. A special thanks from the speaker here. And I also
Yes.
want to thank our technician, Michelle, who is fabulous. And I want to thank you, Laura Bronson, for your role today as host. So.
Well, thank you, Kim. This was such a wonderful topic. It was very informative, and we appreciate your sharing your expertise with us. Well, let's wrap it up. Please do watch for the survey that will open up immediately when the webinar is ended and when you exit the screen. It will also be emailed to you within 3 hours after the webinar ends. So please be sure to complete the webinar. We rely on your feedback to make improvements to our programs. And of course, if you want that CE credit, it is required. And watch for our flyer for the next webinar on March 12th, and feel free to forward that on to anyone who might be interested. And don't forget that you can visit our website at www.alzoc.org, and there you can learn more about our education programs and our webinars, and that is where you can view recordings of the past webinars absolutely for free, although you will not receive any CE credit for viewing the recordings. But this webinar will be posted in about a week, and you can visit our website and view it again, and it is always very informative. So that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.